Yeah, great. So thanks everyone for joining. My name is Alice Gibbons. I'm a customer success engineer here at Diagrid, and we are going to be walking through a hands-on Dapper workflow workshop today. A bit of a tongue twister, but that's okay. I have been working at Diagrid for over 2 years now, working on talking to customers about all things Dapper. And Fernando, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Fernando Rocha. I'm also a customer success engineer here at Diagrid. I've been at Diagrid for about 8 months now, and I do exactly what Alice does, but in the North America side of the world. So, yeah, very nice to be here and very excited to share with you what you can do with workflows on your own.
Yeah, kidding. And so how this is going to go is we're going to do a couple slides on Dapper workflow all up, just to ensure we're all on the same page before we get on to the hands-on portion. And then Fernando is going to take it away into the hands-on lab. Awesome. So with that, I'm going to kind of get into it. I'm not going to do a Dapper introduction at all, but just for some folks that have not had the experience with the project, I wanted to give a quick overview of what we're talking about today. So Dapper is a set of APIs for building distributed systems that can be taken advantage of within your applications with any language or runtime. And we're going to be talking specifically about one of the APIs called Workflow, but there are a ton of other ones that you can take advantage of. So, I would say the more APIs you use, the better experiences for you in terms of the usability of Dapper, like the more usefulness you get out of it. In terms of what you get as well on the platform, you get a number of cross-cutting concerns that are solved for you, things like observability, security, and resiliency built into your systems. And 90% of the time we see these applications deployed on Kubernetes, but there is a way to run Dapper not with a Docker dependency. So with that, as I said, not here to give a Dapper intro. There's a ton of places we can toss some links in the chat if you're looking to learn more about some of the other Dapper APIs. But I wanted to get into why we're here today, which is to talk about Dapper workflow and durable execution. So, what problem are we really trying to solve here? One thing that might be obvious is, organizations lose money when their IT systems fail. And, one thing that we would love is for systems to work 100% of the time. Now, of course, we know this is unrealistic within software, and we know that systems are going to fail and need to recover from failure, ideally automatically. But then also to limit the impact of the failure to, a smaller, more modular system or to like a subset of your critical systems, really. So how do we limit failures from this case? We can make the code execution persistent using what's called durable execution. So in this case, right, if the process that runs the code stops, a new process is started and continues to run the code to completion, picking up like essentially right where it left off when it was stopped. And so how do we do this, right? We do this using what's called a workflow engine. Workflow engine, in its most simplest form, executes a set of activities in a specific sequence and then persists the workflow state to storage. So, as you're kind of going along, each step is persisted to storage, meaning that you can, or your code can really pick up right from where it left off, right from where it crashed. So the API that we're talking about again is the Workflow API, and this enables the durable execution of potentially long-running business processes. How long? Well, we actually in Dapper 115, one of the newer features is that the process or workflow can actually run forever, infinitely. So we'll see how long we can set a new record there. But so this API allows you to enable write your code with durable execution, again, due to that persisting state I was talking about. It has full interoperability with the other Dapper APIs. So if you also want to take a dependency on things like asynchronous PubSub, you totally can. The language support today is in C#, Java, Python, JavaScript, and Go. And it supports a number of patterns, which I will touch on briefly. And then last but not least, this is a great fit. And we've seen a couple of use cases in the community so far for things like data processing, agentic workflows, business orchestrations, and a ton more. So how does this work? I'm going to just do a little quick thing on internals before getting into some patterns. So specifically, you have your application itself, right? And this is actually going to contain the definition of the workflow and its associated activities. In this case, I'm defining an activity as a singular unit of work whether that's like, a piece of business logic should be idempotent. It's used, and within this activity, you can do anything you want, really. You can call other services, other Dapper services. You can interact with a state store. You can interact with a PubSub broker. And then, you are writing this as code, of course. So there is a number of benefits that you get with it. Things like, the obvious version controlling your workflows, having a code review process alongside it, or unit testing your workflow to ensure that it is in fact as close to your business process as it can be. Now, so then you're authoring this within the workflow, using the workflow authoring SDKs within your application where your business logic is running. And then you're reaching out to the Dapper workflow engine, which is built into the Dapper runtime. And this is super important because, Dapper acts as an abstraction on top of many things, many state stores, many PubSub brokers, etc. But we are actually providing the workflow engine within the Dapper runtime or the Dapper process in the case of workflow. So the workflow engine itself schedules and manages activity executions. So all the code execution is taking place again in this workflow app, but these are all scheduled by the engine. The communication between these two happens via an app initiated gRPC stream. So, your application is actually going to initiate that stream. It does not need to have a port open on your actual app. And then it'll communicate back and forth from within the sidecar if it's running Kubernetes or, locally in self-hosted mode. The other thing that's important here is I talked a little bit about, saving the state as the workflow kind of goes on with its executions. So, to complete the architecture, there's an append-only state store that is necessary. And this contains the workflow state. And instead of storing the current state of a workflow as like a snapshot, which is a architecture pattern that some other workflow engines use, the workflow engine actually manages an append-only log of the history that describes like essentially where it is within that workflow running. And this describes the various steps that the workflow has taken, so it can kind of replay those beginning steps if it needs to. And then the last thing I want to talk about is that these workflows are started again via the Dapper APIs. So you can kind of see up here if I wanted to start a new instance of the workflow API itself or of a workflow, I would reach out to the Dapper, in this case HTTP port, and then the workflows spec. In this case, this time Dapper is providing the workflow engine, and then I'm starting a new instance of that. In this case, the checkout workflow. And there's a number of APIs here, things like terminate, purge the state, pause, restart, a ton of things you might want to do for your workflow. So just running through an example, just to kind of exactly tell you like how this works. Starting, here's your workflow on the left. Starting a new workflow will save the unique workflow ID and the input parameters into the state store, right? So you kind of get that right off the bat. And then here's activity one. So as I said, each workflow has a set of activities that is defined within the workflow definition, and you have to specify those so that the workflow itself knows, how to execute this and how to run it. So, this is going a bit quickly, but let's say, after the workflow gets started, and then essentially what will happen is the first activity will get scheduled. So it'll save the activity one and the input of that activity into the append-only state store. And then the workflow execution, again, that code execution will happen within your application. At that point, once that code completes, the output of activity one will be saved in that state store, and then it'll actually replay. So, it'll restart from the beginning, the workflow, and say, okay, I have now workflow input and then activity one input and output, meaning that like I know that I can pick right back up from the end of activity one and starting on activity two. So the engine is in charge of that scheduling process. And this will continue until there are no more activities in the workflow, and the final workflow ID and the final output is done, is saved in the state store. And then, again, this whole process allows for resiliency. It's going to be replaying these inputs and outputs to know like where it picks up. So now it's going to replay here and then start on activity 3. Talking a little bit about like what this looks like in practice, right? We say if we have a super simple checkout process, this is something I think everyone is fairly familiar with when you are, doing some shopping. Maybe you did some on Black Friday or something like that. You're going to take this, you're going to place an order, run through that order will be checked for inventory to make sure that there is enough of whatever you are ordering, and then the payment will be processed, and then the inventory will be updated with that new thing so far as if everything worked correctly. Now, and then of course you'll send that order result to the customer, or the machine, the computer will. So how does this look like as far as the workflow goes? You can kind of see what this might actually be. You can take this business process and kind of break it down a little bit more. Maybe you want to, again, model each of the logic points as activities, but then you have some additional logic in here, like, hey, we're checking the inventory, sure, we're going to check a state store, we're going to make a state store call. Again, this could be a Dapper API. This could also just be a regular call to whatever database you're using via an SDK. It's going to check to see if there is sufficient inventory. If there is, then it's going to go into the process payment activity. Oftentimes, payments aren't dealt with right within the same application. There's usually an external payment provider, maybe one that's like PCI compliant or something like that. It's going to reach out via that. And then only if that payment is successful, again, go to that other kind of arm of the workflow to update the inventory. And again, this might, shoot off another message via a message broker or something like that. So really just showcasing you can use any of the different Dapper APIs from within your workflow, within each of these activities, and then, provide that business logic or that the orchestration logic really within the workflow itself, which I think you'll see in the hands-on portion. So I'm almost done. I just have a couple slides on some of the patterns. So in terms of, some of the patterns that we see these workflows taking, one of them that is super common, and I kind of just talked through it, was task chaining. So essentially being able to have multiple activities executed in succession, and the output of one activity is passed to the input of the next. So this is a fairly common use case for a workflow, things like, any sort of data processing operation where you need to manipulate the data, agentic AI, we've seen like a ton of that come up recently, order management, like I just talked about from a checkout process, all of that, you need the previous, the output of the previous step in order to kind of continue on. Similarly, Dapper can also support fan out, fan in, meaning that you can have multiple activities that are executed in parallel or simultaneously. And this pattern is super important when the activities are independent of each other and do not need the output of the previous one in order to run. This really good use case for things like background processing, any sort of dealing with large file management or backups. You can chunk out a task and then have it run, simultaneously. It improves the speed of the process, like a ton, right? Threefold in this case. The monitor pattern, also fairly common. So, a recurring activity in this case is executed. This is often combined with a durable timer, where, this pattern is periodically checking the status in a system. So it's going to, create this timer. It's going to reach out, create a timer, and then wait a certain amount of time. And then this continuous new part is really important because what it allows is this workflow to continue as a brand new instance versus, taking up room in the state store and adding, an additional kind of append-only log or additional log entries for that same workflow ID. It's going to rewrite the history there so that it'll overwrite the existing stuff. And this is, good for use cases like scheduling or repeating jobs, any sort of polling scenario, that you would need to continuously come back and check something. And then, last kind of but not least, one of the other patterns we actually are going to showcase in this workshop is external interaction. So, the external system interaction pattern in this case allows, the workflow to pause and wait for an external event. So, maybe you need an approval from somebody, maybe you need someone to just like ensure that the quality control is okay, or like a human in the loop AI job. There's a ton of use cases for this within business, invoice approvals, things like that. And then in this case as well, there are a number of, improvements being made specifically in Dapper 115 around the scalability of all these workflows. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Fernando to discuss a little bit about like the hands-on portion of the workshop and just in terms of what we're going to do next.
Well, thank you so much, Alice, about what we're going to be building today. So what we're going to go through here is a workflow process that is going to help you build an application to support the process of ordering a pizza in a pizza store, right? In a pizza restaurant. We're going to go through all the way from ordering the pizza to cooking the pizza to delivering the pizza and even validating the quality of the pizza using an external event, right? We're going to use some of the patterns that Alice discussed. But what I wanted to share with you here is that you have a couple of options how you want to do this. You can code along with me here. You can start the process, but honestly, I think it'll be best if you would just look at what I'm doing here. Take a look at the repository that we have, because the repository that we have is it has a bigger idea, right? It is a Dapper workshop that we're currently building. It has 4 different challenges, and it's covering 4 of the most popular APIs that Dapper developers are using. So again, the goal of this workshop is to show you, right, and to explain to you, first of all, how Dapper works, give you some of the basic and advanced concepts that Dapper has to offer, and really gives you hands-on experience on what you can do. So I'm expecting the audience today to be like people who are very well, they know Dapper very well, they've been using Dapper, but also people that are new to Dapper, right? And know what Dapper can do, but never really played with Dapper before. So this is a good entry point for you, the Dapper workshop, for you to start working and understanding what these popular APIs are. So just gonna go through the challenges that we have here extremely quickly, so you know where we're gonna start our process from today. In the first challenge, you're going to learn how to deal with state management, right? You're going to learn how to create a new service using Dapper, start up a service with the Dapper sidecar, and how to communicate with a state store, in this case Redis, but it could be whatever you want, using the Dapper state management building block. Then we're going to do service invocation. You're going to create 3 new services: Pizza Storefront to start the process of ordering an application, Pizza Kitchen, who's going to be cooking the pizza, and Pizza Delivery to deliver the pizza. And you're going to be using the Dapper service invocation building block to invoke the services in a chained way, right? So you can at least see the events happening there from start to finish, all right? Third challenge, a little bit more complicated. We're going to put these 2 pieces together, right? Challenge 1 here at the bottom, where you're going to be still saving the current state of the order within your state store, and up here you're still going to be invoking the 2 services to do what it needs to be done to be able to order, cook, and deliver a pizza. But the difference is we're adding a message broker here at the end, and you're going to use the Dapper publish and subscribe building block and API to communicate with this message broker. So this is the state where we're going to start our workshop today, right? All of these 3 services that we have created at the top, they're going to be publishing messages, okay, to this pub sub broker. And we have a pizza store who's going to be subscribing to a particular topic here. And every time a new event comes along, it's going to save that particular state in the state store. It will also give you other capabilities like getting the current state, retrieving the current state, and also deleting the state itself, all right? And the reason that workflows fit really well in this use case that we have is because right now we're chaining this service invocation calls here in a not very elegant way, right? I'm going to show you the code in a little while, but basically what we do is we go through a for loop to create a couple of order states for ordering a pizza. Then we call the Pizza Kitchen service, and then we call the Pizza Delivery service when it's over. It works really well, right? But the problem is if you have a problem within the cooking process, or if you want to add a validation stage that says, hey, unless the pizza cooking process is validated by an external event, you cannot deliver it, it becomes a little complicated to manage that. Again, not using workflows, right? Just using this chained invocation calls. And that's why we're changing it a little bit here. We're creating something very similar to one of the use cases that Alice shared with you. we're going to make this a little bit more elegant. We're going to create a workflow that is going to allow a customer to start the pizza ordering process. The workflow is going to call the pizza storefront directly to order the pizza and make sure that the payment's there and that people are able to cook the pizza. Then it's going to call the pizza kitchen activity to start cooking the pizza. And then we're going to add something a little bit different here. We're going to add an external event requisition, right? The workflow is going to wait until an external event arrives that says that the pizza is ready to go, right? If it's good enough, the manager went there and said, well, the pizza quality is good, so it's ready to be delivered, or that it is not good, right? So you need to cook the pizza again. And then we're going to do the pizza delivery activity, and then we're going to end the workflow, right? That's basically what we're going to be doing here. Oh, sorry about that. If you want to do this workshop by yourself, there are a couple of prerequisites that you need to follow, right? They have a couple of dependencies that you need to create here. You need to have Docker. We highly recommend you have Visual Studio Code because we depend on a lot of some of the extensions that Visual Studio Code provides to us from third parties, like REST client, that facilitates the process really well. If you're using dev containers, if you know what dev containers are and you're using them, you don't need to do a lot of the things that we're doing here on the prerequisites. But if you don't, it's not that complicated. Basically, you need to have Dapper installed, okay, on your environment, latest version, the best. If you want to use 1.14 or DRC for 1.15, feel free to do it. There are a couple of explanations here regarding ports, IP security, etc. But you should be good to go. This workshop is, you can do it in 2 different languages, Python and .NET. Today we're going to do it in .NET, right? If you want to do it in Python as well, the code is simpler, right? Because we're breaking down the code a little bit more on .NET because it kind of requires that. But overall, you should be good to go in both languages. They both work exactly the same. All right. I'm not going to go through all of the challenges here, of course. I'm going to start on challenge 4, which is the challenge that we're going to go through here. And as I mentioned to you before, we have a few things that we need to accomplish during this workshop, right? During this particular challenge. The first one is we're going to replace all of the chain services that we have, right, in our pizza storefront and replace them by having our workflow orchestrate the activity process of calling, right, calling them sequentially. We're going to add an external event to validate the quality of the pizza after the cooking process is done. And if we have enough time, I think we will, we're going to add a few different things here, right? Like querying for workflow status, pausing the workflow, resuming the workflow, and then terminating the run if you want to. So Kaj asked the question before, right? Is it possible for me to pause a workflow, right? Or stop a workflow for a while until I fix some of the bugs that I have outside my workflow, and when they're fixed, resume the workflow? Yeah, you can totally do that, right? You can stop a workflow, you can pause a workflow, it's a better word, right? You can pause a workflow, fix what you need to do, and then resume the workflow, and then things should continue to work, right? And you can add a lot of logic here to like retry activities. If something fails, run the activity again, right? We're keeping it pretty simple today, but the flexibility that this gives you is extremely powerful. There are some best practices to follow. If you go to our documentation, you should read them before you do things. But overall, yeah, you should be more than good to go to start things off. Okay. All right. With that said, we can get into Visual Studio Code. All right. Move this guy here. Okay. What do we have here, everyone? So we have the scaffolding of the project, right? So we have the project created up until challenge 3. As I mentioned to you before, we have it built all the way up to this. We don't want this anymore as is. We want some of it still working, but this part here at the top, we need to remove. And if I want to give you a little bit more details on how this is going to work, right? This is a little bit crowded, but it's going to give you a better understanding of what we're trying to build here. We're going to create a workflow again, and every single activity, right? Every single small piece of this workflow it's going to be calling a service that already exists using Dapper service invocation building block. Okay, and then it's going to do its thing, right? So the pizza storefront is going to use the PubSub API to publish a message, much like the pizza kitchen and pizza delivery, right? So at this point, we're just making sure that we're able to run them in a particular way. Okay, and how do we do that? Let's go through some of the things that we currently have in our project. One concept that you may know if you worked with Dapper before, but it's the concept that of components, right? And if you've seen how Dapper interacts with infrastructure, right? It creates basically a development layer that abstracts that communication between your code and the infrastructure that you're using. And the way that it does that is through component files, right? And the component files are the representation of your infrastructure. In this particular case, we have here a PubSub component, right, which is our Redis component that we're going to be using. It's already part of my Dapper installation locally here. It already comes with a Redis container for you to use. And I also have a state store component here. My state store component is, well, it's pretty simple right now because it's running locally, but I'm basically saying to my code that, hey, if you need to communicate with some underlying infrastructure, it needs to be Redis, right, for state store communication. So every order is going to be saved there. And I'm also going to be using my Redis to manage my workflow state. All right, Dapper is going to use it to manage my workflow state. Okay, so the first thing that I need to do here is actually add the Dapper. I need to add the Dapper workflows package to my application, right? Because right now my pizza workflow service doesn't have anything related to that. So no clients, right? I don't have the Dapper client yet as a dependency on my code. So I can do .NET add package Dapper workflow is going to add the dependency for me here. And at this point, I'm going to be able to use it as I need to use it. Okay. A couple of things to look at here before we actually start coding is we have a model here. That's an order model, very simple. It holds the structure of an order, a pizza order that I'm going to be creating, order ID, pizza type, size, the customer, the status of the current order. And if I have an error throughout my workflow, I'm also going to be adding it here. I have a customer structure here as well. A customer class is going to hold the customer information, not very important for this piece. And I have a couple of things here that I'm going to need to use, right? For workflow purposes. The first one is the validation request. The validation request is it's just an object that's going to hold the body of the request of the external event that I'm going to send to validate a pizza or not. So it's pretty simple. It's going to have the order ID and if it's approved or not and ready to go to delivery. And manage workflow request, it is simply it's a small class, a small structure that only has an order ID here, and I'm using it to manage the workflow using the SDK. You see this in a few moments when I go through the code, right? But basically, I just need to hold an order ID so I can send a request to my application so I know which order I need to cancel, which order I need to pause, which order I need to get information from, or resume from a workflow perspective. Okay. All right, so let's start. The first thing that I'm going to need to do here is, as Alice mentioned, right, workflows depend on a state store. And because workflows depend on a state store, I need to add a couple of modifications here to my code, right, to my state store component, so we can hold the information. The first one is, and this is more like not advanced, it's a basic concept, but it's worth explaining. First thing that I'm going to do here, I'm going to add some scoping to this component so I keep it like a little bit more secure. And scoping, what it does is it makes sure that only specific applications can have access to my underlying infrastructure, right? So if we go to our challenge 3 here, you see that for my particular state store, not all of my applications will need access to the state store, right? The only one that needs access is pizza store at this point. So why would I add it to my pizza delivery, right? Why would I say that pizza delivery needs to have access to this state store? It doesn't. So I can fix that, I can add a little bit more security to it by authorizing or declining authorization to particular service. So I can add a couple of services here that I'm going to use, and I know that pizza order needs access to it. And now I also know that my pizza workflow will need access to it at some point. And since workflows are in the background using the actor building block, Dapper's actor building block, I also need to say that need to say here that this state store, it's also I need to add a parameter that says that this is an actor state store as well. The workflows can be managed using this state store. Okay. So from an infrastructure perspective, we should be good to go. There's not a lot more that needs to be done here. So let's just move to the next step. Second thing that I need to do here after fixing my state store component, not fixing it, but adding the things that I need to add, is creating the activities, right? And as it was mentioned, they are the basic units of work within a particular workflow, right? Activities are the way that tasks get orchestrated within your business process. So every single one of them is going to have their own responsibilities. Every single one of them is going to have their own life cycle, is going to do whatever they want and interact with the underlying infrastructure that they need to interact with. And you can manage them individually, right? You don't need to manage them as like an entire process. So it gives a lot of separation of responsibility there. So we need to build them separately, right? Or is a good practice to build them separately. And I'm going to need to build 4 different activities here. Cooking activity, that is going to be responsible for calling my pizza kitchen service to cook the pizza, delivery to call my delivery service to deliver the pizza, storefront to order and manage the order, and validation to basically just add a new state in my state store saying that, hey, I'm waiting for a validation for this particular order. So let's build all 4 of them. Let's start with the cooking activities, the first one here, right? So let's go through the logic a little bit, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit more here. Hopefully you all can see this properly. If not, let me know. But let me go down a little bit here, right? So I'm not going to go through all of the code here, everything, because if you go through our workshop, you're going to understand a little bit more how this works, especially from a .NET perspective. How you can inject the Dapper dependency here on your code. All of that I'm not going to cover today, but it is a good thing for you to look at after. But what I wanted to share here with you is that my cooking activity is of type workflow activity, right? And workflow activity, it receives a generic and it also returns a generic if you want to, right? In this case, we're going to be receiving an order and we're going to be returning an order to the person, to the workflow itself, so we knows if the order is ready to go to the next step or not, okay? And since I'm using a workflow activity, I need to override this run async method here, which has a workflow activity context. That's where you're going to get the workflow current status and the instance ID that you're currently running. I'm going to go through that in a few minutes. And I'm also going to pass an order here, right? The order is the body of this requisition here, and it is what I am going to be transforming in this case. Okay, so in my particular case here, what I want to do, I want to invoke my pizza kitchen service, okay, using Dapper's service invocation building block, so I can start to cook the pizza, okay? So I can create a response variable here, and I can say await. I can use my Dapper client to invoke a method in an asynchronous way. And this method is going to take an order, and I'm going to invoke it, taking an order, and I need to return an order from it as well. All right. I'm going to be doing a post to my endpoint. HTTP method post. Oh, sorry. I'm not really trusting GitHub Copilot today because I'm going to, I'd rather write this on my own because he may miss something. Pizza Kitchen is the name of my service here, right? Pizza Kitchen is the name of the service that I have created who's going to be cooking the pizza for me. And the endpoint that I'm going to be creating, that I'm going to be calling, it's called cook, right? And for this cook endpoint, I need to pass an order in. All right. So at this point, what I'm basically doing is, hey, when my workflow says run this activity, the first thing that it's going to do is going to log some information saying that it's going to start the cooking process for order ID. And after that, it is going to invoke my cook endpoint within my Pizza Kitchen service, okay, passing the order. And then it's going to log in saying that, hey, the order is now cooked and it's ready to go to the next step. Okay, and then I return a response to my workflow, so it knows if I can move forward or not with it. The delivery activity is going to be virtually the same, honestly. So I'm just going to copy and paste here. We don't need to go through it again, but it's basically doing the exact same thing, right? That the cooking activity is doing. I'm just calling pizza delivery to start the delivery process within the delivery endpoint that is inside the pizza delivery service. Okay, also passing an order here. Okay. The storefront is a little bit different, and I'm going to explain why. Well, the ID is pretty much the same. The storefront activity, the ID is pretty much the same, but I'm going to show you right now what the pizza storefront is actually doing, right? So it's going to call storefront order here on the storefront service, so we can actually order the pizza. And if I go to my pizza storefront service, if I go to the controller itself, I know that it's basically processing an order. And at this point, what this is doing is it is setting up 3 different stages for the ordering processing. We have validating, processing, and confirm. They're all going to take like a duration, right? Because I don't want this to run too quickly. I want to have some pause between like every single event that the pizza ordering process takes, just to keep it a little bit easier to see and take a little bit of time before every single event happens. For every single event that I have, I'm going to publish that event to a pub sub in a particular topic, sending the order, so the order can get saved in my state store. All right. And the thing that I'm doing that I want to remove here, remember, one of our requirements was to remove this chain request calling here that I have at the top, right? So pizza storefront, I don't want it to call pizza kitchen anymore, and I don't want it to call pizza delivery anymore. So I can get all of this information that I have here. There you go. All of this information that I have here, starting the cooking process and starting the delivery process. I can take this out. I'm going to comment it out right now because my workflow is going to take care of this sequential API calling. Okay, service invocation call. Okay. So now we have 3 of the activities created. I need to go through the validation activity now. The validation activity is a little bit different. What I'm going to do in the validation activity, as we were discussing before, the validation logic, it's basically from our workflow perspective, is going to wait for an event to happen, right, before we can move forward with the order preparation process, right? The cooking is done. I need to validate if the cooking is good enough, and so I can call the pizza delivery activity to move forward. Okay. So in this case, what I'm going to be doing is, it's a very simple process in this particular case. All I'm going to do here, I'm going to save a new state in the state store. And as Kaj mentioned, right, couldn't I interact with the infrastructure directly from the workflow activities? Yes, you could, right? In this particular case, what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be saving a state, right, using a different key within my workflow, right? Just saying that, hey, for this particular order, I have it pending validation. I have a status of pending validation, so it needs to wait before it moves forward. Okay. Recapping what we did here, we created 4 different activities: cooking activity, delivery activity, storefront activity, and validation activity. The cooking activity, delivery activity, and storefront activity, what they do, they invoke endpoints that already exist within our services, right? Within our solution, so they can do their own thing. storefront is going to order the pizza, kitchen is going to cook the pizza, and delivery is going to deliver the pizza. And then I created a separate activity called validation activity, which is different, just saving a state within my state store that says that a particular order is pending validation. Pretty simple stuff, okay? Now we're gonna get into like the good part of it, like the orchestration part of it. All right, let's jump into like the coolest part of it, right? Our workflow itself, how we're gonna be orchestrating this process here, okay? So you need to, if you're following the Dapper workshop, you're gonna need to create a pizza ordering workflow on your own, and that workflow is of type workflow, right? Same process of the activity, generics here. You can take a generic, return a generic, it doesn't matter. In this case, we're gonna get an order from the beginning, and then we're gonna send an order back with a completed status, delivered, or an error if something happened in between, okay? You need to override run async again. You have the workflow context here and the order that you are receiving as the body of your request. Okay, now let's implement the workflow logic together so we can understand what we're doing here. Let's start with the try catch statement. I think that's the best thing to do here. Exception. Yeah, let's do this for now. So I'm going to try to get this workflow running. If something fails, well, I'm going to throw an exception here and just say that, hey, this didn't work, the workflow is completed, and that's the error that you got. Okay, so what is our first step? If we remember what our graph looks like, what we need to implement first, right? The first step that we need to do is we need to place the order and process it. And the way that we place the order and process it, it's beforehand we were just calling we're just doing a service invocation call to the pizza storefront services, but right now we're going to do things a little bit different, right? I'm going to get an order result back here from this because I really need to check what is the order current status after I am done here. So I'm going to use my context to call an activity, and I'm expecting an order to come back from this activity. So order. And the activity that I'm going to call, it's the first activity, not the first activity, but one of the activities that I've created. And the first one that I need to call is storefront activity, right? So the storefront activity is the first activity that I'm going to be calling. And if you recall correctly, storefront activity requires an order to start doing what it needs to do. Okay. This guy here, I don't need it anymore. All right. So if you remember my storefront activity, what it does is it uses the Dapper service invocation to call my pizza storefront service to start creating an order. It goes through 3 different stages of creating an order, and then it returns an order for me with the current stage that it's in right now. So I need to validate that the order now is in the confirmed state before I move forward to the cooking stage, right? Because if it wasn't confirmed, if the payment didn't go through, I cannot start cooking the pizza, right? So I can check if the order result status is different than confirmed. If it's not a confirmed order, if I'm not ready to cook, I can just throw a new exception here, and you can handle this as you want, right? You can try the ordering processing again. If you have a payment activity, you can try to go through the payment again. You can do a lot of different things here. But in this case, I'm just throwing an exception here that says, I'm going to log the failure true if I have to, right? So I can just say order failed with status. Yeah, this is good. All right. Oh, actually, the error I'm logging a different place. So I can log the error here. And if I don't have an error, I can just say unknown error. Okay, let's fix this. All right, I think we're good. Yeah. All right, so recapping this, calling the first activity here, storefront activity, passing the order. When the order comes back, I have a status. If the status is not confirmed, I'm not doing anything. And then I'm just throwing an exception that says, hey, I couldn't complete the order, right? So the second step, I need to cook the pizza. And cooking the pizza is exactly the same thing. I'm gonna just copy and paste here. Just copy and paste here so we see what I'm doing. I'm calling the cooking activity and I'm sending the order result from my first activity call. And after it is cooked, if I don't get the cooked status back, I'm going to move forward here and I'm not doing anything, right? And remember, just going back to what we have created here, our next step is not deliver the pizza, right? Our next step is actually waiting for an event, for an external event to validate the pizza before we can move forward. Okay. So now we're going to do this. Let's create a step 3 here. Validate cooking. And the validation process a little bit, we're also going to call the activity, the validation activity with the cooking result here. We need to do that, right? Just to save that state and say, hey, I am waiting for a particular validation. Right now, our cooking result, our order right now, status should be pending validation or waiting for validation. Let's just put waiting for validation. Pending validation is fine. Follow the documentation here to keep it consistent. We're going to wait for the validation here. We're calling that activity. That activity is basically saving a new state in our state store, not doing anything crazy. Again, we could do this here. I just wanted to separate this responsibility as well, but which is a good practice to follow, right? So after that, I'm going to wait for the manager validation. And the way that I can wait for an external event to happen, I can use another API, can use another endpoint that is provided to us, which returns a validation event to me. Oh. And that validation is going to be called by using context.wait for external event async. Okay. And this wait for external validation async, it can also return a generic for me. In this case, I'm going to be returning a validation request. And if you recall, when I showed the models to you, the validation itself, right, the validation request itself, it basically has the order ID and the Boolean value associated with it. All right. And that's what's going to be used to approve or deny the cooking process. I need to send an event name here, and the event name that I'm going to send is validation complete, because when I send this event back, when I trigger this external event, I'm going to need to send an event name that's called validation complete, so it knows which stage I'm talking about and how to move, and if it should move forward or not. Okay. If the validation is approved, or actually, if the event is not approved, right? If I need to recook the pizza, I'm just gonna say throw new validation failed, cook the pizza again, right? And this is a great place where you can improve this. You could add a while validation is not approved. You can do the pizza cooking process again, right? Until the validation is there. You recook the pizza, until you get an external event that says approved. Right now, we're just saying validation failed. The order is going to be thrown in the trash in this case, and the order is going to end. Okay. Last stage, we're going to deliver the pizza. And this is basically what I need, right? I need to call the deliver activity, passing this current, I'm going to use the cooking result because the validation result is of a different type. I'm going to pass the cooking result, the result of the cooking, so I know if I need to move forward with my validation or not. Okay, and if my delivery status is different than delivered, I'm going to throw a new exception that says delivery failed with a particular delivery error or an unknown error in this case. All right. Okay, so at this stage, we're done with our workflow. If everything worked as it was supposed to work, I can set the delivery result here, status to, I'm going to say delivered, I'm going to say completed, right? I think it's the best result. Delivery status is going to be set to completed, and then I'm going to return my delivery result. So I get the result in its last stage. Okay. If something fails, I have a status that I can share here. I'm going to say failed. And I can also add an error here because I have the exception. I can just add the exception message here, and then I can return the order as well. So if everything worked perfect, if something failed and I got an exception, I'm also going to return the pizza order with the error itself. Okay. So there was a lot to cover here. We still have a good amount of time, so I'm just going to run through some of the steps very quickly. We had to create a pizza ordering workflow of type workflow. It takes two generics. We're taking an order and returning an order to the user. We have to override run async, and run async is also going to take an order and return an order to us. I'm calling 4 different activities here. One that's going to be creating the order, one that's going to be cooking the order, one that's going to be validating the order, right, which is a little bit different. I use call activity async to call all of my activities, but I use wait for external event async to wait for an external event to know if I should move forward or not, if the pizza is validated or not. Okay. And that's basically what we're doing. Okay, now I need to give my users an endpoint to call this workflow, right? To start this workflow. And the way that I'm doing this, I have a controller here. And this controller has a couple of different methods that I can use, right? I can go through it. It's basically, it's just a controller, right? Nothing too crazy here. But I've created a few endpoints here. I've created an endpoint called start order and an endpoint called validate pizza. Start order is going to give someone the ability to start this workflow, right? And validate pizza is going to give them the ability to send that external event to validate, saying that the pizza is approved and ready to go to delivery or not. So what I'm doing here is very simple. First, I need to create an instance ID, and that's a very important concept for workflows. That's how the Dapper client is going to understand which workflow we're talking about and which workflow instance we're talking about at this point, right? Because right now, instead of running things in a synchronous way, we're running things asynchronously, right? So I can start as many workflows as I want. If you saw the presentations yesterday, you know how many improvements we had on Dapper 115 regarding how many workflows you can run at the same time and how fast they run and how scalable they are, etc. Right? So right now, I could run many different workflows, and they all need a different instance ID. So what I'm doing here, I'm just saying that my workflow instance ID is going to be pizza order with the order that I have created: 1, 2, 3, ABC, whatever you want, right? But this needs to be consistent in a way that that's how the Dapper client will know which workflow it is using and how it can get status from the workflow and how it can the workflow client, how we can get status from a current workflow, how we can terminate, pause, resume, start, and send external events, all of that. So to start the workflow here, what I'm doing, I'm just logging a status. I'm starting a workflow for a particular order. And I'm going to await for my Dapper client to start workflow async. Okay. And this workflow is going to take a couple of things here. First, I need my instance ID. So, instance. It's spelling. Instance ID is going to be my instance ID that I have created up there. Am I spelling this correctly? Okay. Let's follow what we're doing here. So let's start with the workflow component so it doesn't bother us. So the workflow component that we're going to be using is of type Dapper. Our workflow name is the workflow that we have created, right? And if I'm not mistaken, the name is the workflow that we have created in the step before. The workflow name that we gave was pizza ordering workflow. Pizza ordering workflow, great. I need an input for this workflow, and the input is going to be my order object, right, as it stands. And finally, I need an instance ID, which is going to be the instance ID that I have created, right? Right now, we're going to see this obsolete warning here. It's because up until Dapper 114, this was in the alpha stage. This should be removed now on the new SDK that is going to be released. Okay, so don't worry about this. It is going to work. It is just saying that, hey, this API is not a GA yet. Okay, I start my workflow. I run the workflow. I can start as many as I want, as I mentioned to you before. And at the end, if everything's okay, I'm just going to return the order ID, the instance ID that I have created, and the status, which is started, right? So I'm just going to start and let it go. I just get a representation here that says, yeah, the workflow was started successfully and everything is fine. For the pizza validation process, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to await, and I'm going to use my Dapper client to raise a workflow event asynchronously. And that workflow event, that workflow event, it's going to need an instance ID, as I mentioned before. We need that for everything that we're doing. I'm going to need a workflow component as well. A very important piece that I need here is an event name. If you remember correctly, I was using the event name validation complete. And this is how I'm going to be able to associate this event here with this event name with the event that I'm expecting. And the event data is my validation object, which is of type validation request, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it is a validation request, right? I'm just going to say for the order ID, it's if it was approved or not, right? Okay, perfect. Couple of things that we can check here while we're here. I've already implemented this method, so just so we can look at them to see how it goes, right? So if you want to get the workflow state, you can just call the get workflow async API using the .NET SDK. All right. It is going to give you the current state of your workflow, if it's running or not, if it's completed or not. You can pause the workflow using the pause workflow async. Same thing, just pass an instance ID and the workflow component. To resume a workflow, you have exactly the same thing. And to cancel a workflow, to terminate a workflow, use the terminate workflow async to do that as well, right? So it's important to note that's an important concept. For terminating a workflow or pausing a workflow, you will need to wait for the current activity to end. And after it is over, then it's going to be terminated or canceled, okay? You need to be mindful of that. Because if you cancel workflow and you still get things going on, you will know that it's because you have a current activity running. Once it finishes running, the workflow is going to be stopped. Okay. Lastly, what we need to do, I have an error here somewhere. Okay, there you go. Okay. Last thing that I need to do, when I start my service, it's already here, right? I'm going to need to register my workflow and my activity so the Dapper client knows which one are they and what it can and cannot use to as a workflow or as a particular activity, right, when it is at runtime. That's the last part that I need to do. And it's a very important part. There are many errors that occur when developers forget to register the activities or change an activity name or create a new one and forget to register them. That's a very important piece of knowledge that you need to have. Okay, and I believe I have removed the service invocation calls from the pizza storefront. I did. Perfect. Let's run the application, right? So I'm going to run this application a couple of different ways. As you know, I have 4 different services that are already completed and built. So I'm going to run them using a Dapr multi-run file. And if you've never seen one before, that's what it is. You just create a YAML file that tells you how to Dapprize all of your applications and start them with the sidecar. You just pass the things like the path and a particular app ID. That's a very important concept for Dapr. That's how it does service discovery, for example. You pass the ports that are necessary, app port, HTTP port, and the command to run all of your applications, right? So you can do this. And I'm going to run pizza order, storefront, kitchen, and delivery like this, so we can see all of the logs coming in one particular place. So let me do that. Dapr run. All right, it's starting all of my apps. No problems here, that is good. And the pizza workflow, I'm gonna run it independently because I wanna show it in a different terminal to you, okay? So let's run them separately here. So I'm gonna do Dapr run pizza workflow. I'm passing the protocol HTTP, the app port, the HTTP port, and I have a resource path here because I need to know where my infrastructure components are. And then I'm going to run the application. Let's see what I get. I think those are just warnings because of the methods that are said obsolete, but they're not really obsolete. They just weren't stable in the latest version. We can ignore those. So the workflow was created. Let's see. We have our workflow engine initialized. Where are the activity registration process? Registering component, initializing Dapr workflow component. Okay. All right. Everything's being registered here. I have my workflow logging service started. List of registered workflows. I have my pizza workflow and my activities. I have my storefront activity, cooking activity, validation activity, and delivery activity registered. So I should be ready to go at this point, right? And to test, I have created a REST client file here that will allow me to start the order. So I'm just going to call my pizza workflow in localhost 8005, and I'm going to call my endpoint start order that I have created with this particular body here for the pizza, right? It has the order ID, pizza type, size, and the customer information. That's all I need to create a pizza. Those are the mandatory fields. Let's see what happens. All right. Important piece here that we need to know is, and I'm going to stop this at some point, but let's look at the workflow first, right? So the workflow, what we have here, we have a workflow that started successfully for the order 123. I have started the ordering process for order 123, and the order process was delivered with, published with the status confirmed. I started the cooking process. The pizza is cooked, and now I'm waiting for a validation to be completed before I move forward, right? If I go to my other apps, you will see more information. So I'm sorry because it logs a lot of information here. But overall, every single step of the pizza cooking process, every single event, it is being created, right? So it is being stored. Validating, processing, confirmed. We have the cooking started process, like received order update. We are starting cooking. We have preparing ingredients, cooking, making dough, adding toppings, baking, and cooking quality check is now. The status is cooked at this point, okay? Now I have a couple of endpoints here that I have created as well. And as you can see, as I mentioned before, we can start 5 more, 10 more, 1,000 more workflows here if we want to, okay? They're all gonna run asynchronously in their own threads. But I have also here 2 endpoints to validate the pizza. I have a validating the pizza, which I approve or I deny, right? I say that's not good enough. We need to cook it again. So let's send a validation request. that says it's going to resume our workflow. Validation event raised successfully. The delivery process has started. And I am now delivering my pizza here on this side, right? Delivery arriving, delivery at location, and the pizza was delivered. After the pizza is delivered, I get a status delivered, and my workflow here is completed. Okay, so basically, our workflow worked. It orchestrated every single one of the steps that we needed it to orchestrate. If we look at the place here, right? It did all of the orchestration pieces that we needed to orchestrate. It waited for an event for it to complete, and after it completed, it started the delivery activity, and then it ended our workflow. Okay, so we're good. We're good to move forward. We're good that the service was tested. Overall, it is working what we needed to do. It is working. If I wanted to test it again, to test a few different possibilities or capabilities that my workflows provide, I could simply run this again. And we can do this because I still have a few minutes. Let me open my endpoints here. I'm going to start a new workflow. Let me just terminate this one here. Oh, it was terminated properly. So if it was still running, I could run the terminated method here to terminate it. If I start it again, I start it again. And I can do a couple of things here like, let's close this guy. I can do a couple of things here like get the status of the workflow. And I'm going to get this particular response here. I get the workflow input, the custom status if I have one, the output of this currently, right? So cooking activity failed with unhandled exception. So I had a failure here on the cooking activity for some reason. I can check on that. Oh, of course, I closed the app. That was stupid. Sorry about that. Dapper run. That's good, right? So this works because I wanted to check the current status of my workflow, and I had a failure that I didn't even know of. So I know that the workflow right now, it has an error here, right, with the information from my activity. So that's a good thing. So if I want to start the workflow again, and I want to get the status, I should get something a little bit cleaner, right? No failure details, all the information that is responsible, time that it started run, time that was last updated. If I want to pause the workflow, I can pause the workflow. As I mentioned to you before, it is going to wait for for the current activity to finish before moving forward. But as you can see here, the cooking activity was completed, but it's still not waiting for the validation, right? Because I paused the workflow. If I resume the workflow, I'm going to get the validation activity process waiting for it to start. And then I can do whatever I want. I can terminate the workflow. I can, let's say, not approve this pizza, and then it's going to be over at this point, right? It's going to be completed. The workflow is not going to go to the delivery state. So you can do a lot of different things, right? And that's it. That's all I had to share with you. So a few takeaways from this is, first one, go through the workshop yourself. It's going to become much clearer, right? We had a lot of different moving pieces here that are required us to do some back and forth. But if you really want to know Dapper and learn Dapper and how these things link with each other, how these APIs complement each other, and how you can build like an amazing solution using these APIs, go through the workshop from scratch. You'll learn a lot more. And the idea here was, of this particular piece, how we're able to pick something that was already cool, it was already working, and we're able to make it a little bit more elegant by just orchestrating the service invocation call in a different way and adding a validation request. So just make sure that everybody has seen this, showing it again, Dapper workshop. Please go through it. Let us know if you think something needs to be changed. If you have any recommendations, if you want to run this in your organization, if you want help running this on your organization so you can learn Dapper a little bit more, let us know. But this is a very good starting point for you to learn Dapper a little bit more and to start understanding all of the most popular APIs. Okay.
Yeah, and if you if you want to learn some of the other work, learn some of the other APIs, like again, as Fernando mentioned, like challenge 3 is PubSub, challenge 2 is service invocation, and challenge 1 is Dapper State. And so you can start from the beginning and work all the way up, or you can start from challenge 3 and just, you know, implement the workflow, the piece there, which is great. So yeah, I think with that, we're pretty good, Fernando.